to create irresistible organizations, but especially from the inside. So we still do a little bit that outside and employer branding part, but we mainly focus on the inside.
Yeah, because I was about to ask, if you're internally focused, how does that impact the brand?
Yeah, so the brand kind of becomes true. So what you were saying about
Huh?
it's too rosy on the outside, I also
Huh?
see that you see great benefits and really beautiful job descriptions, but then
Yeah.
it's simply another job in another tech company that's not well funded yet. So I'm always thinking, why shouldn't that be honest? They
Hmm.
always say it's an amazing culture. It's not always true. They say you get great growth opportunities, but then you ask for it and they don't even have a framework or something for that. So when we work internally, we make sure that the outside brand is often not as necessary anymore, or it just it exists because employees start talking about it. So, for
Ah.
example, if your internal culture is really good and you are an exceptional employer and you do things the right way, your employees, for example, might leave something on Glassdoor or they start sharing things on LinkedIn. So the outside brand becomes real
Ah.
because your employees internally become your external ambassadors.
Yeah.
I always think you should be very wary if the company writes a lot of beautiful things externally and has a great website, but then you
Hmm.
go to Glassdoor and you see a lot of 1, 2, or 3 star reviews, or no employees are posting anything on LinkedIn. Whereas with companies where people love working, you see that employees are their biggest ambassadors and tend to share a lot of content or reposting content from the company. They're quite vocal about how much they enjoy it there.
Welcome to Women Disrupting Tech. My name is Dirk Jan Hupkes, and on this podcast I give the women who work in tech the platform they need to inspire and empower each other. Join me on a journey into the world of entrepreneurship, funding, biases and role models to discover the strategies for success in the tech industry. In other words, how women can disrupt tech. Are you ready to listen? Hey, welcome back to Women Disrupting Tech, and thank you for listening to episode 74. Now, if you want to build a unicorn, having the right people on your team is important. Having the right team with the right people and the right culture can increase performance, employee happiness, and profits. Plus, most early stage VCs will look at the team as a way to gauge if they are capable of making their money work. So, today we're going to talk about teams and culture. And our guide on this journey is Ingeborg van Harten. Ingeborg is the founder of 7 People, and that's a people and culture consultancy firm for progressive companies. Her mission is to build irresistible organizations where people love to work. Ingeborg spent 15 plus years working for corporates and scale ups on 4 different continents and in 6 different countries. So I figured she probably knows a thing or two, probably a lot more, about building a successful team with the right people and the right culture. And that's what this episode is about. We'll also talk about the importance of retaining people, about the importance of people centricity, and why 7 is the ideal team size. Plus, you'll discover Ingeborg's recipe for making DEI in tech a non issue. So, when you're ready to listen and learn how to build an irresistible organization, please welcome to Women Disrupting Tech, Ingeborg van Harten. Hey, good morning, Ingeborg. Good to have you. Question I always ask at the start is how you got into your current job or current position.
Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. My current job is an interesting question because I don't feel like I have a job anymore.
Oh.
3.5 years ago, I started my own company.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, it doesn't really feel like you're going to a job because there's no longer a boss. It's really something that you do because you love doing it, which is basically should be any job.
Mm-hmm.
But how I got there, so 7 People is a HR consultancy,
Mm-hmm.
and we help very specifically start and scale ups with their growth.
Yeah.
And how I got there is, well, 3.5 years ago, I left Molly.
Mm-hmm.
I got the opportunity after 2 years with them and helping that company grow from 80 to 400 people in 2 years,
Ooh.
to move on. And that was a great decision because I really felt when a company grows a little bit bigger, it's no longer my sweet spot. Uh,
Okay.
and when companies are a little bit smaller and they still need to build a lot, I like it a lot more. So I
Mm-hmm.
started my own company initially as a freelancer, helping small startups, and that grew into the 7 people company it is today, which is ironically not 7 people, but
Yeah.
already 15 people and a few freelancers. So I can easily say we work with 20 plus people every day. And how I got there, it's quite a nice story, maybe. I started not in HR. When I started my career, I didn't study psychology or organization or business organization. I studied media and journalism. And
Mm-hmm.
my focus was on creative journalism, and the studies itself was communication. And I always wanted to work in advertising. But when I was 22, long time ago, and graduated, no one was looking for an unexperienced communication student. So
Mm-hmm.
the economy wasn't great at the time. And after I think more than 50 applications, the only company that said, "Do you want to work here?" was Manpower. And it
Oh.
was a
Yeah.
recruitment company that I walked into, asking them for a job, but
Yeah.
in communications, and they said you can join us as a recruiter. So it was a complete pivot of what I was looking for. But I thought, oh well, I need a job. I want to live in Amsterdam. Rent is not for free even then.
No.
So I took that job and became a recruiter. And quite quickly realized I like the recruitment part, like matching people on jobs, but I much
Mm-hmm.
more like the brand building side. So what I studied in terms of communications and branding and writing, I could apply that immediately by helping my clients write better job descriptions, create better websites or career sites. And I really enjoyed recruitment partially because I could also apply the branding part.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Grew really into a recruiting career. I did a few years of executive search in Dubai. I did a few years in-house recruitment for a large American company based in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, I really thought, I keep bringing people in and building these amazing brands on the outside. So I got
Yeah.
very well at attracting people. I always thought I can pull anyone in if I really make the effort.
Uh-huh.
But then I saw a lot of turnover internally. So it always felt like I'm bringing them in, but as many people each year were leaving. And it felt like such a waste of time. I'm like, what am I really
Yeah.
contributing? Every year I'm bringing 300 people in, and then 300 people leave. So I started focusing on more the retention side.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that all my efforts are in vain? Because people are also leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that it had a lot to do with the managers that they had, the culture of the company, the growth opportunities they were receiving, the not actually finding the culture they applied for. So the
Mm-hmm.
outside was sometimes much too rosy compared to what they would actually find.
Yeah, which is usually the case if you look at advertising.
Yeah. So I decided I really want to make an impact on the inside of the company instead of outside. And that's when my career pivoted from purely recruitment to more learning and development engagement. And
Okay.
eventually I became head of HR for a large tech company. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that company was already 1,200 plus people across 26 countries. And I realized even in that head of HR role, um, I couldn't make the impact I wanted because the company had been around for 50 years. And when you have an older company that has a very set culture and so many ways of working, it's really hard to change.
Yeah.
The older the company is and the longer the management has worked there, the more difficult it is to change a culture or to change ways of working. So I decided let's try this again, but then for smaller companies where they might
Mm-hmm.
be much more flexible or open to change. And that was my Molly adventure. And after Molly, since then, there's been more than 25 companies that I've helped together with my team, all
Mm-hmm.
smaller companies, to create irresistible organizations, but especially from the inside. So we still do a little bit that outside and employer branding part, but we mainly focus on the inside.
Yeah, because I was about to ask, if you're internally focused, how does that impact the brand?
Yeah, so the brand kind of becomes true. So what you were saying about
Huh?
it's too rosy on the outside. I also
Huh?
see that you see great benefits and really beautiful job descriptions, but then
Yeah.
it's simply another job in another tech company that's not well funded yet. So I'm always thinking, why shouldn't that be honest? They
Mm-hmm.
always say it's an amazing culture. It's not always true. They say you get great growth opportunities, but then you ask for it and they don't even have a framework or something for that. So when we work internally, we make sure that the outside brand is often not as necessary anymore, or it exists because employees start talking about it. So, for
Ah.
example, if your internal culture is really good and you are an exceptional employer and you do things the right way, your employees, for example, might leave something on Glassdoor or they start sharing things on LinkedIn. So the outside brand becomes real
Ah.
because your employees internally become your external ambassadors.
Yeah.
I always think you should be very wary if the company writes a lot of beautiful things externally and has a great website, but then you
Mhm.
go to Glassdoor and you see a lot of 1, 2, or 3 star reviews, or no employees are posting anything on LinkedIn. Whereas with companies where people love working, you see that employees are their biggest ambassadors and tend to share a lot of content or reposting content from the company. They're quite vocal about how much they enjoy it there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned this because I actually interviewed Manisha Atukurala. She now works as a VP for Muse. And she told me, well, before I joined Muse, I did a lot of searching in terms of on LinkedIn, but also talking to people. And Muse was the one company where she consistently heard from employees, from managers, from VCs, from, well, whoever she talked to, that it was a great company to work for.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So
It
if you
can be,
yeah, if you don't want to spend a lot of money on recruitment or on recruitment agencies, then use your own employees
yeah,
as those ambassadors. And they will only do that if they feel it's true. You can put all these employer ambassador programs in place or give them incentives if they share things, but it really doesn't work. It has to be honest.
yeah, yeah. That is, but that is also true in branding. If
Yeah.
you have build a brand and subsequently cannot live up to what you promised, then your brand is, well, goes to zero.
Yeah, eventually, yes. You might be okay for a few years, but same with brands and products. Eventually, you'll get reviews that will tell people don't buy it. And it's the same with companies where if the culture is really bad, you'll see high turnover, and people will, yeah, not leave those reviews you need.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I love the inside focus because then the external work is really easy. It's very easy if internally everything really works and there's a strong foundation and there's nice leadership and the culture is good. It's very easy to sell it externally.
yeah, because the people from the inside will be doing the sales job for you.
Yeah.
Um, I have two follow up questions. One is you worked had quite an international career. Are there things from, let's say, Dubai or from that American tech company that you bring into the realm of startups?
Yeah, I think that, well, the most important things I learned that were done well at larger companies
Mm-hmm.
is that they always offer growth opportunities to employees.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always in a way mapped out. So there were career paths, if you may call it, or growth frameworks or opportunities to advance your career
Mm-hmm.
because they really needed people to stay and they were
Yeah.
growing their leaders from the inside. That's always lacking at startups because they've never thought about it. And it's also not what you start with, building
No.
career tracks or growth frameworks for your people. But it was always the reason why people stayed.
Yeah.
So at that American company, they're called ACOM. They have been around 80, 90 years. They have 80,000 people or so globally. People
Mm.
tend to stay there their whole career. It's a very low turnover company, and
Yeah.
that's because of all the growth opportunities. And this is also what I try to bring to all the startups. Like you should start thinking about this earlier. If you want to keep the people you're now working with,
Mm.
don't hire them to do a job and expect them to do that for the next couple of years until you can hire someone new. So basically, the focus on retention. And I think what I loved about Dubai, for example, is that
Mm.
I wouldn't take all of those companies there as an example. They were growing very fast, but the diversity there was extremely high because almost every single person in those companies was not a
Mm.
native or a local.
No.
Very few Arabs were actually working at the companies that I was recruiting for. So
Mm.
their view on diversity was amazing because it
Mm.
was basically any country in the world was an opportunity to recruit from. And every single person in the company would speak English with each other. And there was a very high acceptance of people from different types of cultures. So that for me was an eye opener because I went there from the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Here I was still struggling sometimes to convince, this is 20 years ago, companies to hire international people because they're like, no, everyone internally speaks Dutch and that will be very awkward.
Mm.
And then I moved to an Arab country and I realized everyone here speaks English and it's more diverse than in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, yeah. And I also saw that that works. So for me, from then on, there was never an excuse anymore not to bring in diverse or international people and then say it won't work.
What do you mean by it works?
That if you put a lot of different cultures together who've never
Mm.
worked with each other, they have done the most amazing work in Dubai. If you look at the towers that they've built, how
Yeah.
fast they've built everything, the speed with which they were building things there, like they have
Uh-huh.
a big vision. So it's think big, but also execute. Here in the Netherlands, they're building a metro and it's like 10 years late.
Yeah.
There, it's like 3 years early. So they've brought all this diversity together, all these people from different countries who've never worked with each other, and they're able to build faster than anywhere in the world. And I think that is amazing because here they always say it will delay us, it won't work for the culture, we don't think it's effective. But I've seen the opposite.
Yeah, it's a bit like we say in Dutch, wat de boer niet kent, dat eet hij niet. What the farmer doesn't know, that he doesn't
Yeah.
eat, in the English. But yeah, in the Netherlands, where I think in project management there's a rule that all the benefits you should halve and all the costs you should double, and that's something that was probably invented in the Netherlands, or at least adopted very fast.
And I also see there they very much focus on output. So it was always very hard to focus on project management and deliverables
Hmm.
and not so much on building the culture of a company. It was just, this is what we need to deliver. We've got the money. This is the time frame. Let's just go and do it. And I think that mentality is sometimes lacking here.
Yeah, because actually, so they didn't spend time on building the culture in the organization, but still got the job done earlier.
Yeah.
That's interesting because we're here in the Netherlands. We're like full of, yeah, we have to build a culture. Because I was about to ask, okay, what let's say I want to build a tech unicorn. How do I do this from an employee and a team
Yeah.
perspective?
I'm not saying you shouldn't focus on culture because people in the Netherlands are different than the people who
Yeah.
work there. So there they hired people who already knew how to get the job done because they always hired people who had done it before.
Ah,
And they
okay.
put them together with really high incentives and say, get the job done. I think in the Netherlands, that's not realistic because here a startup rarely has the money to pay people who have already done it 2 or 3 times.
Hmm?
And here people will stay their whole lives, as in they live in the Netherlands and they are looking for a safe place. There people come to earn money. So I
Yeah.
don't think it's comparable, but I did love the output there and
Yeah.
the speed with which decisions were taken. So that's something I think companies here in the Netherlands can learn from,
Okay.
not trying to replicate exactly what the
No,
culture
no,
there
the
is.
human rights part maybe leave there,
Exactly.
but
But
uh,
in the Netherlands, well, because the question was, how do you build
how do
a
you,
unicorn, right?
yeah, if I want to build a unicorn, how do I build a team and a culture to help me?
And we could probably spend 3 episodes answering this question.
Yeah.
But I've worked for a few companies that either already had unicorn status or became unicorn. And I think the people that really made that happen were the
Huh?
initial people who they get the job done. So they're very much doers.
Uh-huh.
There has to be someone with a big vision. And you
Yeah.
often see that the founder or the founding team is a team with a big vision. If they are also the doers, it's highly likely that they are more successful. Whereas a
Uh-huh.
lot of companies where you have a founder with a big vision, but then hires people to execute, and the founder can't do that him or herself, it becomes a bit tougher because it is all about the product that you're selling. It has to be good. You can't become a unicorn without having a fantastic, relevant product. So
Yeah,
people who
true.
buy it or use it have to love it. So hire people who care a lot about customer experience, about client experience, about customer service.
Hmm.
Yeah, don't hire people who are looking for a job. Hire people who have that spark in their eyes, who are super excited of doing something amazing. And
Uh-huh.
that's part of your recruitment process. So if you don't know how to find these people because they are somewhat rare, the people that will go the extra mile and work extra hard, because you can't build a unicorn with people who just sit there, do a job, and be told what to do.
Hmm.
And I think the easiest and shortest advice I have is
Hmm.
to hire a fantastic recruiter or recruitment team.
Hmm.
Because if you hire someone who can identify these people, you're halfway there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think identifying those people, because to your point, they are indeed rare.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not one of them, by the way, but I know that, at least of myself. Um, but being able to identify the people who can, is it also that people who have this rare combination of having a big vision and the ability to execute on it are more likely to identify others who have the same traits?
I'm not sure because I've not seen that in real life. I've
Okay.
seen that in startups, often there's a lot of early mishires.
Mm-hmm.
And the mishires come from the founders or the initial team hiring people that look like them or think like them or they can easily communicate with, but
Yeah.
actually are not what was needed as an add-on to that team. So
In
you
terms
see,
of capabilities or
yeah,
in
in terms
terms.
of capabilities or ways of thinking, so they ended up with way too many the same people, so you lack
Uh-huh.
a broader perspective. Or they think that what they need is more people like them, and they look for people who are entrepreneurial. But to be fair, the next layer of people that you're going to hire after you have that founding team, they
Mm-hmm.
are not entrepreneurs. They are people that should love working within a job. So if you keep looking for people that are highly, highly ambitious,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't give them an opportunity to actually shine in that company because a lot of work needs to be done, you see a lot of turnover. So it's funny, you always hear all my clients say this, by the way. I want to hire high performers, A players, and I want to build a high performing team. But if you want to build a high performing team, you should not hire A players.
Not only A players.
No, maybe one or two,
Yeah.
but definitely not a team of A players. Because what you get is if you hire all individual A players who all think they think and know because they've
Mm.
done it before and they've been super successful that they are the bomb, and then you put them all together, they're not necessarily the best team players.
No.
They like being in the spotlight. They think they know best. They already have some experience where they were maybe the best or best
Mm-hmm.
rewarded. So they will all fight for that spot where they can lead probably. And I've not seen that work. I've seen a lot of egos put together and then they didn't go as fast as they should. So if you hire, of course you can't always identify an A player, but if you hire people who do a great job and then you hire a lot of other people who will help them do a great job
Mm.
and you build a team, you're much more likely to get to high performance.
Yeah. So build it. It's a bit like I always compare this to in the early part of the century, there were two big football teams in Spain, Real Madrid and Barcelona. Barcelona was built around Lionel Messi. So they had one or two A players, and
Yeah.
then they built the rest of the team around it to support. And Real Madrid, well, they were called the Galacticos, and they had galactically good players. Like probably individually, they were, except for Messi, better than Barcelona on every single position. But they got the really the shit beaten out of them every single game they played Barcelona. They lost 3-0, 5-0, even at home 2-0 in the semi-finals Champions League, just because they were playing a team.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as a team, you have to make sure that there's people who are maybe the drivers and you have the creatives, but you
Yeah.
also have the challengers, the analysts, the supporters.
Hmm.
And the trick is that those founders, because you said, are those early people able to identify them?
Yeah.
They will rarely identify someone who is quite stable and consistent and maybe a bit more introvert
Uh-huh.
as an A player. But in a
Yeah.
team, they might be the single most important person supporting A players to do their job.
Yeah.
So for me, it's much more finding a balance between the people you hire and making sure that the people who are less likely to be picked out, but might be super, super strong players, we actually call them the rock stars
Hmm.
because they're the rocks of that team,
Hmm.
that they get identified. And I think that's where sometimes it falls apart. And you see organizations who start acknowledging that these people actually contribute much more than they're given credit for.
Yeah.
Those are the companies that then tend to go faster because these are also the people who are very strong in execution.
I think yeah, that that I totally can see. Um, I want to shift to more the retention part of it because you explained at the start that retention is probably more important than hiring, especially if you're in the growth stage. You want to hire and not lose employees. I would think.
Yeah,
How does a people centric culture contribute to that? How do you let's first start with what is a people centric culture?
yeah. I'd say in a people centric culture, if you would ask someone on a Saturday about their job and how was
Mm,
your week, they would say, regardless of how their week was,
mm,
I'm supported. I'm listened to. I get flexibility. There's
mm,
autonomy. There's certain words that are always used, regardless of the company, that will
yeah,
come back. I think people will feel appreciated for their work, have the autonomy to make decisions. There's flexibility when necessary and when possible.
Yeah.
Um, and they have managers who will understand them. And it doesn't mean that anything is possible and there's no rules, not at all. But it means that they are treated like adults and that they are seen as important for the organization. So
So again, this comes back to acknowledging people for what they do and what they contribute. I
yeah, I think the biggest worry people have is not necessarily that they are doing a great job or a bad job, but that they're unnecessary.
yeah,
They might become irrelevant, that they don't matter.
yeah.
So if you work for an organization, the worst thing that can happen, I think, is that all of a sudden your organization has a reorganization, and you find out that together with 300 of your colleagues, you're on the street. Apparently, your work did not matter, or you didn't matter to the success of the organization.
Mhm.
I think companies where people feel they matter, their role is important, they understand what they're contributing, that they are crucial, maybe small elements, but a crucial element in keeping the wheel going and keeping the organization on track. That's really important. And you need people to tell you that.
Yeah.
So making sure that people understand their role is crucial, and that they feel they're being listened to. I think you're then like 80% there.
Okay. So let's say let's go back to the example of being a founder. How do I balance this high performance culture mindset that I have myself with uh, also caring and acknowledging people and ensuring that they feel in place and
Yeah.
respected?
Yeah, I think high performance is the result of the other. So
Ah,
if you feel cared for and not caring like you're my mom, I'm an adult.
uh,
I don't need another mother or father.
uh,
I need someone to treat me as an adult. Think of the amazing degrees and life experiences that these people have when you hire them. The last thing they need is someone to like pamper them. But what you do need is someone to and like being caring also means I listen when you're going through a hard time. I understand when you have an issue that it's important to vent. But I also care, and caring, like being kind, is also giving super clear goals, making clear what the organization is going through. Like being
mm,
transparent, in my eyes, is also caring, being
mhm.
honest. So it's not like an extra effort. It's more a way of thinking. If you care for your people, it also means that at any time they know how the organization is doing, so they don't have
Yeah.
to worry about that.
Mhm,
If you care for your people, you make sure that they know which policies and procedures are in place, that you try to go through performance processes unbiased.
mhm,
Caring extends in the processes and policies you have for your people.
mhm.
Same with empathy. I think if you, as a founder, show high levels of empathy, people will work more for you or they'll work harder. So, high performance is the result also of a team, for example, with less turnover, because you don't constantly have the knowledge leaving your organization, and you don't constantly have to reform a team because new people are joining and onboarding.
Ah, yeah. So you don't have to re-educate people, which by the way is costly anyway. Uh,
If people leave a team because
yeah,
they feel unheard or unlistened to or uncared for, and this could be a reason. If they leave, they think I'm better off somewhere else. That whole team suffers in terms of output and
yeah.
performance.
I was about to ask, does that leave a scar in the team as well?
I think it does. Plus, it might result in more people leaving because within teams, people become friends. Often, colleagues are much more than just work colleagues. Uh, so I'd say focusing on retention is much smarter than focusing on hiring. And then, of course, focusing on the right people. And how you do that is definitely not by saying, I'm only focusing on a high performing team. I'd say a high performing team is the result of well being, of a company with clear goals, of people who are allowed to grow, of
Hmm.
skills being developed, but also of team consistency.
What's the role of the employees in this? Because we talked about the founder part and ensuring that you care for people and make sure that they don't leave. How can employees contribute to this?
Yeah, I think as an employee, you choose a job,
Hmm.
you choose a company, and it's your responsibility to make it work.
Yeah,
So I think you both have a role to play. I think if you earn a salary every month, you're expected for that salary to perform.
yeah,
And yeah, the performance of an employee is their own responsibility. But it means that if I feel in my role, for example, I need new skills or I need to learn something, I go to my employer and I indicate that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying, I've seen all these new tools, for example, AI. I see how AI tools are helping others do better. I want to learn this. I've looked up a few courses I could do. I feel that my employer should then be supportive and maybe to a degree or say, well, here's a budget, go do it. And I think that's taking a leading role in your own development. Plus, I think you have a great opportunity to positively influence the culture as an employee.
Yeah.
I think because all the employees together, the way how they behave, how they interact influences the culture and the feeling of we are a great team. That's not, you can't as one founder influence the whole culture of a company.
Mm-hmm.
So I think your responsibility is to be proactive and to not sit back and wait for your employer to offer you something.
Okay. Um, I want to go back a bit because you said you worked for Molly. What are things that how did you implement this at Molly?
Yeah, when I
Because
joined,
for context of people who don't know Molly, it's a payment company, and they basically take care of quite a bit of the payments of the e-commerce parties, and at least in the Netherlands,
yeah,
they're really
and
well
beyond.
known, and they're now at I think 800 people.
Yeah, when I joined Molly, they were still unfunded, so they were bootstrapped still. It was before the first funding round. So that
Hmm.
also means you can't do crazy things with benefits.
Yeah,
But they got at the stage where, for example, for the first times they saw that they had parents and their employees were having children. And before that, they were quite a young company with very few people in the organization who had kids.
hmm,
So when I joined, they didn't have a head of people before. They did have a recruitment team and HR admin, but not someone who looked at the strategy. And we realized there's now, because they were growing, a different type of employees. And if we want to keep them, we have to make sure that this is an organization where they still feel welcome, even after maybe they start working part time or they have kids or a break.
yeah,
And we were also at the point where we needed to hire more seniors. So people with experience rather than people who learned on the job.
yeah,
And we also realized they are slightly older and therefore mature, and we didn't have benefits for that group. So we thought, okay, how are we going to attract that group and how are we going to make sure they feel cared for?
uh-huh.
Um, so a small example, what we did then is we implemented baby days, which is 5 extra days that you got fully paid that you could use throughout the year when you maybe had a bad night.
Yeah,
So instead of, or your kid was sick. So instead of having to call in sick yourself, or instead of saying, can't work, what do I do? Because it was always a bit vague. What do you do? Do you take a day off? Do you take a leave day? Do you call in sick? It's never really clear, right? When you're
yeah,
not sick
yeah,
yourself, but your kid is. So it was kind of like to help these parents. But by doing so, you're also saying, we are a place that cares for parents. We have to do something special for them. We welcome them back. We implemented, I think also we implemented pension, which is something basic, but we realized that the more mature people get, the more important that becomes.
hmm,
We implemented a few other small things that back then, because I don't know their benefits currently, because it's already a few
yeah,
years ago.
hmm,
Back then, it made a difference for the people who worked there. They felt cared for.
yeah,
But we also implemented, and that was the first time, a framework where we looked at what level are people working,
yeah,
how they could grow. So
yeah,
people in the organization felt, hey, I've been here. My job was always developer. I've been doing this for 4 years, but I don't really see how in the next 10 years, if I stay, that's going to change.
yeah,
So we introduced something we call growth framework, where you have different levels with responsibilities, and we made sure that people were every year assessed on their level, and that you could actually grow. But growing meant it's not automatically by the years of experience; it's by how proactive you are, what tasks you take on, how you develop yourself. And then when you show, I've developed, I'm now ready to step up and, for example, take a broader role or start
hmm,
mentoring people or take on project management work. It was not like you were given that automatically. It's more, I develop myself, I show you that I can do this, and
yeah,
then you might be eligible.
and
But it
and
did, it did ensure a lot more retention.
yeah, yeah, and also probably because you were again transparent about okay, this is what it takes to
Get
well,
to the next level.
to become a senior developer or maybe head of development. Then people have at least a career path in front of them
Yeah.
within the company, which I can understand makes them stay.
Yeah, and the same goes for salary because it's always an interesting topic. People don't like talking about it, but it's becoming more and more a subject that people do talk about.
Yeah.
We always
Do
said,
you think that's good?
yes, I think everyone should be able to ask each other's salary. I'm
Okay.
also pro 100% transparency on this. in my own company is also transparent,
Mhm.
because only when it's transparent can you test if it's fair. And you can still think, hey, my colleague is not as good as me and he earns the same, and that's not fair, but that's an individual perception. If you're
Mhm.
both being paid the same for doing the same job or in the same pay range, then you can explain that. For example, I'm doing the same job, but I've got 3 or more years of experience, that it makes sense maybe that I earn slightly more than he or she. But
Mhm.
if the difference is unexplainable, then to me it's not fair. And
Yeah.
a lot of companies used to have this clause in their contract saying you're not allowed to disclose your salary. That would be breach of contract, which I always thought is crazy, because you always know people will talk anyway. And it's so
Yeah.
much better if you say, this is the framework, these are the salary ranges. You also in job advertisements put the salary ranges. It's not something that is fully negotiable. It doesn't depend on the positive bias a hiring manager has in the interview. It doesn't depend on the recruiter not being able to negotiate as well as you.
Huh?
It's fair. You can compare people with internal people. You say they have roughly the similar role. It's a similar salary. And a lot of the companies say, oh, but you have to pay more for high performers. Like, I get that. Maybe do that. I'm not going to say you shouldn't be flexible in this anymore. But when you pay that, they also have to perform. And this is what they often forget to measure. If you hire someone and they get 50% more salary than someone else in that role, just because you think they are the ultimate A player,
Mhm.
then you should be able to measure that performance. And at the end of the year, prove that they maybe have done 50% more work.
Yeah.
Because then it's still fair, because then you can explain it. And you can
Yeah.
say, yes, that person is earning 50% more, but they've also
Done
produced more. The
50%
output is
more.
higher.
Yeah.
But if that person ends up being somewhat average,
Uh-huh.
or not as good as you think, but the salary gap is huge. And this is what you often see. They make an exception because they really want to hire someone and they think that person will be great,
Yeah.
but then they're not. And then you get these huge discrepancies. So wherever I come, I always say, let's look at the salaries of people. Let's put them in brackets, see if it's fair, maybe correct a few people. And if some people are highly overpaid for their current performance, you should question yourself if you want to keep them. Because if you want to build a unicorn, it's not only people being paid well, but also performing well. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're forgetting to track the performance part.
Oh, yeah. That's yeah, sort of important in
Yeah.
if you want to build a unicorn, you have to. I think you would think at some point you need to track performance.
Yeah, it's not easy in every role. There's also roles that are highly creative. For example, how can you track performance? So you can track company performance,
Uh huh.
and you can quite easily sometimes track a team's performance.
Mm-hmm.
But individual performance is very different. So if we go back to, for example, you have that group where there are a few supportive roles in the team,
Uh
people who
huh.
are maybe not as visible, a bit more introvert, very strong executors, but quite happy to not stand in the spotlight and very often take the shitty jobs that others are not doing.
Yeah.
They might actually be top performers, but it's very hard to measure because other people might be taking credit for the output.
Yeah.
So I'm also a big fan of saying, if you measure performance, it should be super concrete, but it's easier to look at team performance and how a
Mm-hmm.
team is doing and have team goals than it is for individual performers. I think it's the same for developers. Sometimes a developer might find one bug in a whole month, but if that is the bug that solves everything,
Yeah.
their performance is probably higher than a developer who's been shipping every day, doing 40 hours a week, but didn't find it.
No.
So how do you then measure that performance? Have they both put in the same time and effort? I don't know.
Yeah.
But the outcome in this
Was
case is higher of the person who
vastly
actually
different.
fixed the bug. So
Yeah.
therefore it's really also deciding, how are we going to measure performance? Is it based on input or based on output? And sometimes the output is much higher where the input is lower. And I think
Huh?
that's where the world is shifting to.
Mhm.
And a lot of companies aren't really there yet to look at output versus input.
Okay. Well, when do you just as a question, when do you start looking at individual performance? What company size?
What is the company size when you look at individual
Yeah,
inputs?
when do you start looking at individual performance? Because at first I can understand that it's like really difficult to attribute growth to a single person, and besides it's I think especially if you have small team sizes, it's dysfunctional because you're setting people apart
Yeah,
from
because it's not company size. It's when you are able to identify the deliverables clearly and you
yeah.
can hold that person accountable. So that could be a company of three, four, five, or 500, as
Hmm.
long as you can explain to a person why they're doing well or not, what their deliverables are. So it's really easy for a salesperson because you say, here's
Yeah.
your quota, this is what you need to sell. But I think it's very different for, well, take an HR department. I think we're
Hmm.
sometimes suffering the most.
Yeah.
If you say company engagement score, how can an HR department be held responsible for the company engagement score, where
Right.
they
Not.
literally manage hardly anyone, and
Yeah.
all the employees who fill this out are managed by someone else?
Yeah.
So what we do is we run the engagement survey, we can analyze the data, we can come up with ideas to improve it, but you can hardly hold an HR team accountable for engagement survey results. So how do you measure the individual performance of an HR employee? Well, that means that you identify KPIs or goals or deliverables they can actually achieve
Uh-huh.
without someone else influencing the result, and that's really hard. I think it's
Okay.
almost an art.
So on that point, maybe out of curiosity, how do most of if you look at diversity and inclusion, it's often a topic that is sort of put in the HR domain. How do you look at that?
I can
Because it's something that HR can only partly
influence.
influence.
Yeah. I think it should be a company wide responsibility to make sure that a company is inclusive,
Hmm.
because that everyone can be held responsible for that because it's individual behavior.
Yeah.
Individual behavior, I can be an inclusive person, I can take my own responsibility for that.
Hmm.
I can also influence others to be inclusive. I can talk to them about their behavior. Every single person can own that.
Hmm.
I think by being an inclusive company, you have higher chance of being interesting to diverse talent.
Yeah.
So diversity, I think, is also the result of being inclusive.
Hmm.
Um, can you hold HR responsible? The only way I think you can hold HR responsible for building a diverse company is, again, the recruitment.
Yeah.
I've seen managers who work with a recruiter and they're so similar that the recruiter is then asked, can you put forward the best profiles? But the recruiter also wants to be successful in
Yeah.
putting profiles forward that will then be interviewed, that they will put profiles forward that this manager thinks are, for example, A players, and that manager will always be a little bit biased, that those people at least slightly resemble him or her.
Yeah.
I've also seen companies where the recruiter was the opposite of the founder.
Hmm.
I worked with a white male Dutch founder, and the
Hmm.
recruiter was an international female,
Hmm.
still white, but she was international. She came from another country and she was female. The difference between the shortlists was huge because she would be very open to people from a different background, different nationality who didn't speak Dutch. So the difference between the initial recruiter, who was also Dutch and male, and the
Hmm.
international female was that the shortlist became completely different
Yeah.
because her view on what a great candidate was completely different.
Yeah.
And then the founder and the managers have a different shortlist to choose from. And they will still interview the three, four best ones, but all of a sudden they were much more international and much more diverse. So it starts with what is your view and net of the people that you're looking at? And that starts with who is recruiting. So if you allow your managers to do the recruitment, what you see initially by start and scale ups is they go to their network. They post something on LinkedIn, which is seen within their own little network. They tell their
Hmm.
friends and family. So often at the beginning, it's really hard to become diverse because that's also not their aim. They just want to hire people that they can go really fast with.
Yeah.
So they get a constantly growing small group of very undiverse people.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, it's like, shit, now we have way too many people that are the same. We need to become diverse. And that's when it's hard because sometimes you're almost already too late
Yeah,
because
because
people
the
come with
culture starts building with the first couple of hires, I would
yeah.
say.
So as soon as you realize this as a startup, we're now becoming way too undiverse. We're not going to be attractive in the long run at all anymore to diverse talent. That's
Hmm.
when you should try to pivot. And the smartest thing for me is to say, work with a different recruiter.
Yeah, also what Constantine told me on the podcast a couple of weeks back, just add different people into the mix of into the team of that is recruiting. So
Yeah.
have different people do the interviews than you used to have. So you're a founder yourself now
Yeah.
of 7 people. Tell me how do you help other starting companies or fast growing companies? build an irresistible team and build an irresistible company.
Yeah, so for us, an irresistible organization is a place where people want to work. So
Hmm.
from the outside, it looks great, but then when they join from the inside, it is actually great.
Yeah,
They're not being sold a lie on the outside with great employer branding, although
yeah.
we do help companies with the branding, but we focus on the internal side and make sure that, well, we implement a few things that we just discussed. So with a focus on transparency, we help them build a very solid foundation.
Hmm.
We noticed that with a lot of start and scale ups, the people team, funnily enough, is the last team that they build. So hiring an HR person is often not done until they have 20, 25, but sometimes 40, 50 people.
Oh,
Until
okay.
then, they work with a payroll company who does their payroll, but they have nothing, and that probably also does some of the contracts. The founder or the office manager do some of the administration work, but there's nothing really in place that we call a people and culture foundation.
Hmm.
So companies where we come in, often between say 25 to 75 people, they are in need of a much stronger foundation because they're realizing, okay, we're growing beyond the few people we were at the beginning, and we get these questions like, how can I learn, how can I grow, how does it work with salary, how does it work with performance? And then they realize it's actually maybe in someone's mind, but we've never written it down, and also we don't even know if it's fair. And salaries are often based on what people have asked for, not on what we've benchmarked in the market
Yeah.
with the team. So when we come in, we try to find out how can we create a solid foundation where recruitment, onboarding, learning, growth, performance, engagement, everything is made transparent,
Hmm.
implemented in terms of the right processes, the right tools, that people can focus on doing their jobs, and this is not a distraction.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that the HR team has to become big or very visible. I much prefer to enable managers to have the right conversations, to hire the right people, and to understand how everything works.
Uh-huh.
And we make sure that it's solid enough for the company to continue to scale, but not
Yeah.
to scale with different set of rules for every single employee depending on the team you're in.
Hmm.
And we also often build the HR foundation because they don't have HR yet. So we are the first ones to come. Um, by the
Hmm.
time they grow bigger, eventually we hand over to an internal person that we hire. Those people are often not the most senior strategic people because a startup doesn't have the money for that. So
Hmm.
we come with the experience and we build the foundation that they can work from.
Yeah.
Um, and
It's sort of being a colonist who is
yeah,
exploring the territory and then building the
yeah,
first HR hub.
yeah. We've also now worked for so many companies who all think they're unique and special, but when you come in, they actually almost always need the same.
Yeah.
It's more structure, better processes,
Uh,
more transparency for the people in these processes, and then you're halfway there. But we also work for a lot of slightly larger companies, scale ups, where they need additional support or expertise. And again, the HR team is often relatively small compared to the rest of the teams. So when you have two or three people working in HR, they don't always know everything. So we would
hmm.
come in, help them out. It's kind of like we call it co-design on how to structure growth or how to structure performance or how to implement new systems. Sometimes in your career, you only do that once or twice.
Yeah.
So that you don't have the experience yet, and it's really nice to do it with someone together.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how we help, and then we always look when we come internal in the first couple of weeks what can be improved. We give our advice, and if they are open to that advice, we also implement it. So it's quite pragmatic.
Oh, um, it's called 7 people for a reason because
Yeah,
7 is the ideal team size. Why is that?
correct. Well, I don't know exactly why, but it is a research part from I read it on HPR quite some time ago before I started the company,
Uh-huh.
and then I was intrigued because I've always loved the number seven.
Uh-huh.
But there's a few explanations for this. So basically, they looked at Scrum and Agile teams, and
Hmm.
when they were most successful, and it was seven plus or minus two, but seven was in the middle. So
Yeah.
seven was the ideal team size. And then the number seven itself is also quite interesting when you look at communication. They said if you look at how many people are in a team,
Uh-huh.
when does communication still work and when does it break down? When you have up to seven people, you can still in your mind
Hmm.
connect all the dots and have the
Yeah.
lines. So with seven people, there's 21 possible lines of communication,
Yeah.
and a normal human is still capable of doing this. As soon as you go above seven, so with eight people, you have 28 lines, but for example, with 14 people, you already have 91 lines of communication. It's
Yeah.
impossible. So they said seven is the ideal size also for people to be able to still communicate within a team without the team breaking apart in sub teams.
Mm-hmm.
The other reason why I love the number seven is for a lot of people, it's the seven numbers in a row or seven items in a row is the size people can still remember.
Mm-hmm.
So there's also a lot of theory on this that uneven numbers are easier to remember than
Yeah.
even. But
Yeah.
seven is the maximum people can easily remember because nine becomes too difficult. And then we always say we bring something magic to the companies we go to. And in case you didn't know, seven is also the magic number. So if you
Yeah.
ever have visited the Efteling,
Yeah.
seven is the number of fairy tales.
Yeah.
So the 7 miles.
That part I knew.
Yeah. So it's a magic number. So if you combine the ideal team size with it being quite magic and also a number people can still remember, I thought that
Huh?
would be a great name.
Okay, cool. Um, one more question before I want to close. I read that you're a fan of Liz and Molly. By the way, I am too. Why? Are you a fan?
I think they've done something that has been really hard.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about feelings and empathy quite a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very fluffy, soft topic, and not a lot of people are overly interested in this because they feel it's an HR thing. But
Yeah.
they've made it funny and they've made it recognizable, and
Yeah.
they turn it into something that's globally recognized.
Yeah.
So everyone knows their pictures, or almost
Yeah.
everyone, and the books are not dry books written by a psychologist. So I love their books because they're full of pictures and it's not childish. But it
Yeah.
really makes, if you read it as a manager, one is called Emotions at Work and the other one's called Hard Feelings.
Mm-hmm.
If you read it, you really understand why these things are important for employees, how on a daily basis to deal with them. And
Huh?
they've made it accessible, but they also made it hip in a good way.
Yeah.
Because I think previously people weren't sharing these pictures and everyone was
Mm.
almost ashamed to be caring or to show empathy because it's all about A players and high performance and becoming a unicorn.
Yeah.
And since people have started sharing these images and they're rightly recognized, I think they've really opened up the conversation about emotions at work, about empathy, about caring for each other.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan because they were capable or they made this happen. And I think, yeah, the pictures really resonate.
Oh yeah, that absolutely. I'm a huge fan. Every time I see them, I always remember this picture of a person on the stairs, and then with the headline, "I cannot do it," because I still have a long way to go. And then you see it sort of zooms out to the whole stairs, and then turns out that person is almost at the top. So
Yeah,
he or she has
yeah,
almost done it.
exactly. I think it resonates not only with employees but also with the managers and also,
Yeah,
for example, with those founders.
yeah,
I think that's why, yeah, they're a great example.
yeah. So I'm on a mission to make diversity, equity, and inclusion in tech obsolete in about 8 years from now, by the end of 2032. Uh, what would be your expert advice on how to achieve this?
I would want to say by embracing diversity, but I believe a lot of people are not against it in the first place.
Huh?
I believe in tech, everyone's very performance and output driven.
Hmm?
Um, so maybe focusing on if we want to get to a certain output, we need to have a more diverse team.
Yeah.
How do you make it obsolete? So not talking about it anymore, simply by
Hmm?
doing it. So maybe we should stop talking about it so much
Hmm.
and start doing.
Yeah.
And the doing, like I mentioned before, comes from very practical things, from different recruitment agencies or recruiters internally,
Hmm.
different processes, creating more inclusive companies. And it all starts with individual behavior.
Yeah.
So don't look at someone to do it for you. Don't expect an organization to do it. Start with you doing it yourself.
It's a bit like the Roosevelt quote: "Ask not what your company can do for you, but ask what you can do for inclusion."
Yeah, exactly. So I very much believe it starts with every individual.
Yeah. Sounds like a great place to wrap. Ingeborg, thank you very much for the conversation. Last question is where can people learn more about you and about Seven People?
They can go to sevenpeople.team to
Okay.
find more about who we are and what we do. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Ingeborg van Harten.
Okay. Ingeborg van Harten, thank you very much. We'll include those links in the show notes, of course. And listeners, thank you very much for listening. And until the next episode, keep being awesome. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to episode 74 of Women Disrupting Tech with Ingeborg van Harten on how to build an irresistible organization where people love to work. Ingeborg and I hope that you've enjoyed our conversation as much as we did. And if you'd like to learn more about Ingeborg and her company 7 People, feel free to connect with her via the links in the show notes. As usual, you can find the show notes at womendisruptingtech.blog. On the same website, you can also become a member of the Women Disrupting Tech community. Members get early access to new episodes, and in the weekly newsletter, I'll share with you what I learned from each of the episodes. Plus, you'll be the first to hear when new blog posts about women who built the internet come online. So check out the show notes for a link. When you're looking for a role model to inspire your own hero's journey in tech, I invite you to check out one of the other episodes of this podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And if you're a regular listener, please give the show a rating or a review because that way you help other people discover the podcast. If you're a male ally and you want to help the Women Disrupting Tech make this podcast obsolete by the end of 2032, there's a simple thing you can do. Please share the podcast with friends, family, and coworkers because this way you give my guests a platform they need to make it happen. Finally, if you want to connect with me, you can reach me via dirkjan at womendisruptingtech.blog or you can send me a DM on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, simply type in my name and you'll find me. With that, I wish you a wonderful day. I hope to see you in the next episode, and until then, keep being awesome.